So as you've heard, I'm a student at London Business School, but maybe not your typical student. You see, before I came to London Business School, I was a bit suspicious of this thing called business. And as a young climate policymaker in Australia, I'd encountered my fair share of corporate pushback as we strived to make progress on climate action. And yet, over time, my views have evolved. And the more I've worked on the climate challenge, the more I have become convinced that in addition to government and civil society, business will be an absolutely critical player when it comes to addressing the climate issue. And so, 2 years ago, I packed up my comfortable public servant life and head off for business school in London. And it's important to say here that on the whole, my experience has been fantastic. I've learned an incredible amount and met amazing student, staff, and teachers along the way. And yet, despite these many positive experiences, there's just one small question that I can't shake. Is business school failing my generation? As you're probably imagining, this question relates to the subject of climate change, but maybe not in the way you're thinking. And so, for the remainder of this talk, I want us to put aside any thoughts of natural disasters or polar bears and coral reefs. In fact, the first thing I want you all to do is to join me in a little exercise. I want you to close your eyes for a moment and look inside of yourself. And I want you to find your own personal moral compass. Have you got it? Okay, great. Now I want you to take your hand, grab hold of it, and yank it outside of you. For some of that might mean using two hands, if you're particularly stubborn. For others, it might come out rather easily, and maybe there's something to worry about there. So take it out and put it aside, maybe in your bag, or somewhere you know where it is, in case you want to put it back at the end of this talk. Now this is important, because for the rest of my talk, I'm convinced that we don't have any need for morality. And this is because what I want to talk about today is not how business can affect climate change or the environment. What I want to talk about is how climate change, or more specifically, action to address climate change, will affect business, and why I believe that this is something that every business school student should be aware of. So what do I mean when I say how climate change or climate action will affect business? As many of you may know, in December 2015, leaders and representatives of 195 governments got together and agreed on a plan to decarbonise the economy to keep warming below 2 degrees. Now, there is legitimate debate to be had as to whether we have any chance or any will to deliver on this Paris Agreement. But for today, I want you to all join me in imagining that we will. And if we do, what does this mean for business? Well, at the heart of the Paris Agreement is what we call our carbon budget. In order to have an 80% chance of meeting our 2-degree goal, the world can emit a cumulative total of 1,845 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So how are we going with that? Well, in the 150 years between 1850 and 1999, we emitted 1,010 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. Then, in the 15 years between 2000 and 2015, we emitted another 500 gigatons. Unfortunately, I've been to business school and I've learned a few things about addition and subtraction. And what you'll notice is that counting all the emissions we've made so far, what we have left is just 335 gigatons of CO2 to emit in the next 33 years if we're to hit our goals. I raise all this because what it means is that if we're going to achieve our goal, things are going to have to change. They're going to have to change an awful lot, and they're going to have to change quickly. Because at the rate we're on, in just 10 years, we're set to explode and blow up this target. In fact, if we look out to the roadmap to 2050, depending on our goals and our appetite for risk, we're looking at the need to reduce emissions by as much as 95% against 2010 standards. So what does this mean for business? And to be honest, I was tempted to maybe pull this talk at this point when I thought about it, because really, the only businesses that will be affected by this are those that use energy or transport. I think you're getting my point. With a bit of rounding errors, we're looking at around 100% of businesses. Now, the ways in which this will affect any given individual business will, of course, vary. But let's take one example from the International Energy Agency. Research by the IEA has shown that in order to meet our 2050 goal, the emissions intensity of the entire industrial sector will have to drop by 80% against today's levels. This is not unlike telling a company that today has 100 factories to produce the same output in 2050 with just 20 factories. And from the perspective of business, the idea of a rapid and mandatory transition to a low-carbon economy should be setting off risk alarm bells. And with any material business risk, company leaders will face increasing pressure from their shareholders to show they've got a strategy to respond to this risk. But the Paris Agreement and our goal for a low-carbon future isn't all about risks and challenges. It also presents incredible opportunities to business. For example, some research was done not long ago by professors and academics from Harvard and London Business School. And it showed that if you took $1 and you invested it in a portfolio of companies 20 years ago that were focused exclusively on profit, your $1 would have grown to $14.46. This is a pretty good return, unless you realised that if instead you'd taken that same dollar and 20 years ago invested in a similar portfolio of companies that focused both on profit and also on adhering to strong environmental, social and governance standards. Because if you did, your $1 would have instead grown to $28.36, almost doubling your return. Now, this is, of course, a correlation and not causation. But at the very minimum, it shows that a company's decision to engage with environmental concerns and sustainability is not correlated with a lowering of financial performance. In fact, recent research by the CDP, formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project, has shown that companies who have invested in carbon-reducing activities have enjoyed, on average, an internal rate of return of 33%. So whether you think of it as a risk or an opportunity, the business case for adapting to a low-carbon future is clear. Manage the risks, reap the rewards, and as a bonus, your children get a habitable planet to live on. So we've talked about these implications for business, and now it's time to go back to school, back to business school. After all, this is where 42% of the CEOs of the Fortune 100 companies come from. So let's meet a typical business school student today. This is Mary. In 2017, she's 28 years old, and she's studied hard to secure her place in a leading business school. Now, if she passes all her exams and graduates, she can look forward to working until she's 65 or maybe 70 years old. Assuming she does, her working career will extend out until the year 2059, a date by which time, as we've just discussed, the global economy must be well on its way to becoming carbon neutral. And so as we can see, the career of Mary and her peers will take place against a backdrop of not just climate change, but also a global economy that is radically and dramatically transitioning to a low-carbon future. So the question is Mary's business school giving her the education on sustainability and climate action that she will need if she's to succeed over the next 40 years? Well, today it's a mixed bag, but it's important to give credit where credit is due. And a number of schools around the world are making important positive moves in the right direction. Whether it be academics undertaking cutting-edge research on sustainability, like that we discussed earlier from London and Harvard business schools. Or maybe it's sustainability-minded student clubs like the Net Impact Group, who are blossoming and popping up on campuses all around the world. There's even entirely new MBA programs, like the University of Exeter's One Planet MBA. But on the whole, when it comes to business curriculum and sustainability, the case is more business as usual. And where sustainability is addressed, it's done so as an optional elective or a side dish to the main game. But as we've just discussed, climate action and the business need to respond to sustainability will strike at the core of business management over the coming decades. And so the message I want to leave you with today is that sustainability is in fact central to business education. Not necessarily in big green font or as a standalone class. In fact, sustainability should be integrated into the foundations of a modern business curriculum. Maybe it's in accounting classes where students should be discussing how companies will track and report on their environmental, social, and governance performance. Finance classes should include a mandatory lecture on the risks associated with stranded assets. And at least one strategy assignment in business strategy classes should feature a scenario where carbon is priced. Giving students the opportunity to reflect on and practice how they would respond to such scenarios will be invaluable to their future careers. So where are we? And what's the verdict for business schools? There's no doubt that the trend on sustainability in business education is a positive one. But I strongly believe that unless business schools rapidly and dramatically integrate sustainability into the core of their business curriculum, there's a real risk that they'll end up failing not just my generation. So what are we going to do about it? How can we make a change? Well, as I come to the end of my MBA, I don't have all the answers. But I, for one, am committed to pursuing a new reality. And I believe we all have a role. We can speak in the language of business and vote with our wallets. If you're a consumer or a shareholder, show business that there's rewards for taking action and taking climate action seriously. If you're with a company or a business professional, tell business schools and business school ranking organisations that you want talent that's ready for a low-carbon future. And if you're a student or an alumnus, demand more, ask questions, and get involved. After all, we're the customer, and last time I checked, we're paying an awful lot for it. So there is one thing I learnt in business school, and that's that organisational change takes time. But I believe that together, with encouragement, support, and pressure, we can kick off a revolution in business education that will not only benefit future business school students like me, but also businesses, society at large, and the planet upon which we all depend. Thank you.